One thing that we use in wastewater, environmental biotechnology, is to work for the microbes so they can work for us. To understand their environment at the micro level to the best we can, so we can work for them, so that they can work for us reliably. If we understand them very well, then they can actually provide services.
Something to Chew On is a podcast devoted to the exploration and discussion of global food systems. It's produced by the Office of Research Development at Kansas State University. I'm Maureen Olevnik, Coordinator of Global Food Systems.
I'd like to welcome back our co-host, Dr. Mark Crosby, Associate Professor in the Department of English, and welcome our newest co-host, Dr. Jeanette Thurston, Director of the Food Science Institute here at Kansas State University. In this podcast, we have discussed the importance of research dealing with water availability and its importance on the agricultural system. Today's discussion will take a slightly different approach in looking at water contamination from waste, with a specific focus on swine waste lagoons. The ability to use microorganisms to treat and help to purify wastewater was identified in 1914. Current aerobic methods based on this technique are energy intensive and costly, and still leave substantial usable material behind. In this podcast, we talk with Dr. Prathap Parameswaran, Associate Professor in the Department of Civil Engineering at Kansas State University. Dr. Parameswaran's research focus on the use of anaerobic microorganisms is a continuous system that produces energy and isolates material that might be used to increase soil nutrients and more. Dr. Parameswaran discusses his approach to combating water contamination and its importance within the agricultural systems. Welcome, Dr. Parameswaran, and I would like to say thank you for joining us on Something to Chew On. Today, we would like to take some time to get to know you a little bit better. If you could give us a little background on who you are and what brought you to the area of study that you are enjoying now, and ultimately what brought you to Kansas State University.
So maybe I'll tell you a little bit of my journey when it goes back to southern India. So I grew up in southern India, where monsoons and the environment are dear to heart. I have seen the rains roll in, and that has been part of our life, right? 6 months of monsoon-like weather that had a big role as a child growing up, understanding the environment and really listening to its tunes in the way I do things. But I did want to study something related to the environment in general. During my formative years, I didn't know which exact field to go in, and with my limited exposure at that time, the closest match I found was chemical engineering. We didn't have a separate field called environmental engineering at that time, and I didn't know about it. And I just wanted to study environments in general, right? So, but engineering was influenced again by my father, who was a mechanical engineer. And so he told me about what he does and aspects of that. But then I asked him, where does chemistry come into picture, or biology? And then he said, that's not what I do. I do mechanical engineering. So that's how I decided to go the chemical engineering route. And I did enjoy what I was studying all through my undergrad years. And towards the last semester is when we start getting introduced to environmental engineering. And then I just was fascinated by the concepts of how microorganisms can actually treat wastewater. That was a big impact factor for me. And I then realized, okay, if they can do these kind of things, what kind of aspects of society benefits from it? Right. So I then decided to explore industrial and municipal opportunities to apply those concepts. And I ended up working for about a year in pulp and paper, where all these issues come together. And pulp and paper industry, just to give you a little bit of a background, is very water intensive and has a lot of impacts on the environment. And so I had the opportunity to work in that field or in that industry for about a year in India, during which my urge to find out how to manage these wastewaters more sustainably got even more heightened. And with the right encouragement and support, I realized that environmental engineering as a field was not even picked up in India, but was already well routed in other countries, especially the United States. And so I applied to grad school. In 2004, I got into Illinois Institute of Technology along with other schools. And Illinois Institute of Technology was more welcoming in the fact of both financial support as well as a right advisor who was ready to work with me. So I came to the US in January of 2004. And that's where my journey began in the field of environmental engineering. So that kind of marked the next phase of my life, pretty much. And so after finishing my master's, I was further encouraged to do higher studies leading to a PhD. So I moved from IIT Chicago. That's where it's located, by the way. So I moved from there to Arizona State University. So I was a Sun Devil. I am a Sun Devil still, I guess, though I'm also a Wildcat. I spent almost a decade in Arizona State University studying environmental biotechnology, which is a specific sub-area of focus within environmental engineering, and continued to work there as a research scientist until about 2015. At different levels, I was an assistant research scientist, an associate scientist that would manage projects related to various aspects of wastewater treatment, remediation, things like that. And in 2015, I was already interested in going towards the academic route of research and creative inquiry and education. I loved the aspect of mentoring students and teaching them. I really liked that through my PhD years. And so the right opening came up. K-State had a nice, opportunity that was very suitable and apt for what I'm doing. And so here I am. That was in 2015. And now I guess I just got tenured last year. And so that's exactly where I am. And I've been so happy at the initiatives and directions that I've gotten at K-State. I'm so thankful for that.
Prathap, are you from Kerala by any chance?
You are exactly right. Thanks, Mark. I am from the central part of Kerala. Uh-huh. So though I grew up in a bigger city, my grandmother's house is in a small village. That's where I got all these connections to the environmental part, the monsoons that I talk about. The monsoons hit everywhere, but it's really a charm when it hits the countryside.
I spent some time in the backwaters of Kerala.
Oh, wow.
So now I'm sort of putting together my experiences on the backwaters and connecting it with your experience, your interest in the environment, because those waterways are so integral to just life there.
That's so true, Mark. The volume of water that comes down is just amazing. And how it kindles life from a barren land in May to greenery by September is amazing. The whole land transforms.
It does indeed. It's sort of astonishing. So one of the things, I guess, connecting it to your current research, I have many fantastic, distinct memories from my time in India and Kerala in particular. Yeah. But one was the hole, and it just goes directly into the water. So I can see that obviously this is into your research, right? What can we do with this waste other than let it go into the water?
That's a very good point, Mark. And it has piqued my interest at several times, including the big luxury boats that we have for cruises, right? So I wanted to briefly touch upon that topic since you brought it up. Is the fact that in international waters, there are no regulations to really contain that waste. And so while you're supposed to treat it to some level, the discharge regulations that apply on land don't apply there. So that unfortunately, sometimes it's often not, it's misused, I would say, not put in the right effort to treat it to the levels because it costs money. Although some environmentally conscious agencies or entities might do it, but majority just take advantage of the fact, unfortunately, from my viewpoint. And so, in the ocean waters beyond your international territorial borders, there are no regulations. So though people have been striving for that. And in India, it's even more loose, unfortunately. And there is a lot of regional fragmentation when it comes to that.
So Prathap, I don't share the India connection with you, but I do share the Arizona connection with you. So I'm from Tucson. I'm a wildcat.
Oh, wow. I'm sure you have got to some much heated games maybe at your times.
That's right. But, I'm also a microbiologist. And so I am thrilled. I had a little bit of a background document that was shared with me for our conversation today. And I love the fact that you love microbiology as well. And, I had a teacher who said anything and everything was possible in microbiology. And so I have two questions for you. One is what piqued your interest? Why microbiology? And then two, talk to me about how anything's possible in microbiology.
Yeah, that's great. So let me share some perspectives on your question, Jeanette. So why microbiology? That's a fascinating question. I think it's because I have tremendous respect for microbes. They are so small, but they can do so many big things. If you think about even the evolution of our planet, they had a key role in bringing us to what we are today. If they had not done their initial role, we as humans won't be here. And so that respect that a small organism can do such mighty things is the reason why I think I chose microbiology. And it was fascinating to just think about smaller things that we don't understand. That gave me more innovation. It made me think, okay, we don't understand it, but they do this. How? Even today, we don't understand it completely. That drives us, I think. That part of the unknown keeps us going. While as the engineer, I know they do some things reliably. So that's my other factor, that they can be trusted. So one thing that we use in wastewater environmental biotechnology is to work for the microbes so they can work for us. To understand their environment at the micro level to the best we can, so we can work for them, so that they can work for us reliably. If we understand them very well, then they can actually provide services. They are not intended to do that, but they provide that anyway. And so if we understand and follow that principle, I think we can reap a lot of mutual benefits for them and us. I think we need to just respect them.
They kind of get a bad rap, right? We've just been in this pandemic for 2 years. So, like the viruses and...
Right. There's the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? So the good part often needs to outsmart the other aspects, but then the bad and ugly come out quite often, just like in real life.
And I think the fascinating part of your work is that your work really shows that this is, again, coming from a microbiologist, but microbes can actually save the world.
They can. I believe in that. I know that it could be, there could be different viewpoints on that, but I strongly believe they are part of the equation. I think an essential part of the equation to save the world. Start anywhere. Coral reefs, they have these microbes that are colonizing the inside. And if we don't understand them, then the whole picture gets blurred. So, yeah, that's great. I'm glad that I'm glad to know that you are also a microbiologist. I also looked up what you do, and the disinfection aspects and the food safety related to microbiology is another essential connected feature to all that we do. So I think that's great.
Prathap, can I take you back to the bad parts of microbes? And to a non-microbiologist, could you explain some of the dangers of, for example, bio-waste?
Yeah. So that's another interesting point, Mark. So there are different phases of the bad, and I can just tell you a few that I encountered, and this goes beyond that. Of course, the pathogenic microbes are the bad and the ugly, and that's another element. But the bad within bio-waste is when the process goes out of control. And if you do not understand, like I said, if you don't understand the microbes and where they thrive, you just let them do what they want. Then the conditions change uncontrollably, and then you have microorganisms that just prevent the wastewater process from happening. The idea is to use these microbes, say, to clean the water. Now the bad players take over, and the water becomes even more polluted. Or sometimes another classic example is in remediation, where you try to clean up a contaminated site with toxic chemicals. Right. So I'll give you an example of a chemical, a dry cleaning chemical called TCE, trichloroethylene. It was used so widely in the 40s and the 50s, and it led to legacy contaminants we are still dealing with now. We know that microbes can do some of those reactions in an effective and environmentally sustainable way. But if you don't understand what they do, they end up producing a product even more toxic than TCE. If you do not manage them well, they produce a compound 2 times toxic than the actual starting material. But if you waited long and you control them, they take it to a safe product. But if you didn't understand them and just let it go, they'll end up producing an even more toxic product.
That's simultaneously reassuring and frightening.
Yeah, right. So I think what it tells us, we need to really take the effort to understand what they do and in all aspects. And if we do, and then as engineers and microbiologists, we can responsibly manage them or let them do their services in an efficient way that we can benefit, and they are also doing their job.
And so is it possible, I'm going to ask you a question that probably has a very large answer here, to explain in layman's terms at any rate, this process of cleaning the water using the good?
So wastewater, which we flush down our toilets, and industries put it down their lines, all those is considered waste, right? I mean, there are several other types of waste too, solid waste. We are just initially focused on wastewater. I'll also come into the solid waste later. But the wastewater that we flush down our drains and houses ends up going to a central facility. And it is in this facility that we are able to supply, and this wastewater is not, something that we want to deal with most often. But then it turns out that wastewater is full of whatever things our body doesn't digest, carbohydrates, proteins, and fats, pretty much, that are not used up for our own use, or for animal use. And that is still food for a whole bunch of life, which is microorganisms, because they love to eat it. And we want to get it out of the water. So that's a perfect combination. And so these kind of microbes are abundant in the environment, but they will do the reaction in natural environment at a very slow rate. They might take maybe days to months to do it. While the wastewater production or the flow rates that we deal with a fast growing society, needs us to treat these wastewater in the order of minutes to hours. And that's where engineering or technological developments come in to put those microbes, concentrate them at much higher levels, and to keep the water flowing in a way they contact the microbes, the water gets treated or eaten by the microbes, but then the liquid keeps going. The bacteria, there's just so much of them that we call them sludge now. You can play with them separately. You can retain them. You can make them contact more wastewater, and you waste them separately, or you remove them from the system at a different rate. That's the engineering aspect of the microbiology, which lets us to clean the water. And they like to eat carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus, which is the main ingredients that are bad in the water, or they want to be removed from the water for any end use back to the humans or to the environment. Because if you were to discharge that water right away, they consume oxygen. They will degrade. As I said, the microbes will use oxygen and these food materials to consume the oxygen out of the water and make it anaerobic, which will impact aquatic life. It will impact the quality of the water in the lakes and the rivers and the ocean, and also impacts that quality of water for us to drink.
I see. So there's sort of Goldilocks point then. You have to stop this process.
So yeah, you need to play that balance, for which you need to understand the microbes again. And then if you understand that you know that how long can the microbes be in the process, and how long can the water stay there so that it gets completely treated, and then you can discharge it. And over 100 years or so is when this field has been really rife. The actual process, it's called activated sludge. That's the name of the traditional wastewater process. It was again found in the UK in 1914 by two engineers. And they just accidentally discovered that the bacteria can do this. That led to the way we do wastewater treatment today for the majority. While it is a good process, it ends up consuming a lot of energy because we use oxygen. Oxygen is air. Basically, you need to pump air into wastewater. And that consumes, while we think it's just a simple aquarium stone and fish tank, but if you think about the water volumes we produce millions and billions of gallons of water. And to pump that much amount of oxygen leads to an energy bill of, for a city of Manhattan, Kansas size, it's about $80,000 to $150,000 a month is the bill they pay. And the significant chunk of that bill comes from blowers, blowing air into the process. And so it produces good water, but the area that I'm interested is to really change the tide in the way we do wastewater, is to be able to recover energy and valuable products without having to invest that much amount of energy. By looking at anaerobic organisms, which don't use oxygen, but work in the absence of oxygen, but end up producing and releasing a lot of other end products we can capture and return back to the society. That's the research topic or area, one of the platforms that I've been working on, at K-State especially, and all the projects that I do connect to that topic. And I can tell more about that.
It'd be interesting to hear a bit more about how the work that you're doing fits right into the food system. I can think in my mind of 100 different ways that works into it, certainly through animal waste, through a variety of ways.
Exactly. So let me start talking into that. I'll segue into that. As I just mentioned, the technology platforms with wastewater are essential element within any kind of food system, because we end up producing in any kind of food system. If you think there's waste produced, whether it be crop-based system, animal systems, they all end up producing different levels and quantities of waste of different compositions. Currently, in some of them, there are some practices to retain and reuse them. And most often, there's not such a strong regulation. There's more focus on the production aspects of things, but the waste aspect of things is more focused on minimization of the waste. Whereas if you were to recover useful products and put it back into the circular economy, you need to be developing treatment technologies of waste, which will be wastewater or solid wastes, and convert them into useful energy, useful nutrients, and useful water that is of value. And you can get those three things, which then sustainably feeds back to your production system for producing, whether it's a crop-based system or the livestock operations. They all need these three inputs, which is water, nutrients to eat, and carbon in a form that can be used for the animal production or for the crop-based system. So I can give you some examples of how we are trying to do that. So the platform that I've been working with is the anaerobic membrane bioreactor platform, technology platform. So anaerobic is no oxygen. Membranes is, I was explaining you an analogy of water purification systems, filtration systems. But these are polymeric interfaces which pulls clean water through. So that's the membrane part. And it's a bioreactor because it uses these microorganisms that we have been talking all along. The benefit is it really doesn't need oxygen. So that cuts down that energy component of using oxygen. But then the membranes help to produce clean water and keep the microbes and the sludge on the other end of the process while you produce water. And that water not only is clean, it's free of carbon, but it is full of nutrients, mainly nitrogen and phosphorus in the water. So you can imagine just clean water, but with a lot of nutrients. And the advantage is multifold. You can either capture them into compact products that you can then produce and generate fertilizer products, which are an active line of research that we are doing. And it is beneficial than the way we produce fertilizers now, because it is coming from a waste material that you have been investing into the system. But then you can have the ability to put it back to the system. And then after removing those nutrients, you are left only with water that is basically free of all those components of carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus, and any other micro elements, which often gets co-removed during all the upstream processes. And now you get water. But you also got the energy captured during the anaerobic process as biogas. I wanted to reiterate that. So the carbon there goes to biogas, which is methane, which is then useful for heating and capturing energy and getting energy back to your system. And it is for your production system. It could be for heating your process. It's energy in any form that you can use, provided you have the right conversion platform in place to do that. But then you have the nitrogen and the phosphorus captured as fertilizers, and then the clean water. You can also apply the water directly for cropping, depending on certain areas and needs, because you already have water with the nitrogen and the phosphorus available for growing the plants. If it is a fast growing type of plant, then that might be sufficient for vegetable farming in some cases. But then you need to have the right composition of the nitrogen and the phosphorus, and that will depend upon a lot of factors. But the idea is that this is a tailored platform that can suit to multiple applications. So and we have been working with this at K-State, and I'm really, the Global Food Systems Initiative provided a big impetus for the work and has led us to be able to develop this platform beyond methane to produce other organic carbon compounds too, like acids, like vinegar, for example. Right. So it's just a wild concept when you think about producing those from wastewater. Right. So how would we do that? But again, if you think about it, the wastewater that we treat and put back in the river gets pulled up by the next town. So in the grand scheme of things, if you're able to meet the quality and the quantity, it is all sustainable. And that's what we are striving towards, is to show that circularity and be able to convert some of that carbon into other assets like vinegar or acetic propionic acid or butyric acid or caproic. These are all really the backbone of the chemical precursor industry. Right now, they're all heavily dependent on fossil fuel industry to be produced. And some of these enter back into the global food systems because like some of these organic acids are probiotics for cattle consumption and production. And so that's just one of the connections that you have. And there are other things that you can do with these organic acids. So the Department of Energy has funded us to carry out this work to also show organic acid production. And so we are excited as we go through that journey that just got started. We have just been 4 months into the project.
Very good. So I have a couple of questions for you. So I happen to be in a meeting with colleagues who know your work, and they talked about, so you can correct me if I got this wrong. So you're actually taking swine waste and you're making potable water, or at least that's what you're attempting to do.
Right.
Which is fantastic. As someone who's worked with swine waste and looking for pathogens in swine waste, how do you get the smell out? If anybody knows anything about swine waste.
It's a valid question, right? So I think what you said was correct, Janet, but the portable aspect is still some ways out. But indirect reuse is what we can try to do. The smell out is actually achieved in several ways. The long stabilization in the anaerobic process helps to remove some of the odorous compounds, right? The odorous compounds are a whole range of compounds, ranging from sulfides to, mercaptans like compounds and other organosulfurs and organosulfur nitrogen compounds, which are responsible for the smell. And so the anaerobic process itself takes care of some of that. But then the more important process is during the nutrient capture process, we actually use a series of adsorption and precipitation steps where we use other elements like calcium, which is lime. Basically, if you think about it, that's what lime is used for, is also to remove odors and smells, is that it can essentially absorb them into their matrix and hold it. And so when we do calcium phosphate based precipitation, a significant fraction of the odors also get removed. But then you would also need to do further processing for that. And so the way our current project is set up, we are also going to be using a set of wetlands, constructed wetlands, go through that, which should further help to polish and remove the odors. But the majority of the removal, from what we have observed, takes place partly in the anaerobic process, mainly in the calcium and the clay-based contact process. And then hopefully the last part of it will happen in the constructed wetland.
Oh, very good. Well, thank you for that.
So we the odor is not a metric for the DOE, but that is an essential metric for anything we do for scale up. So you're exactly right. But the problem is your mind's metrics are set differently because you're right next to the lagoon, which smells really bad, of course, right? But then you're also treating it. So you're really not able to distinguish if the water is smelling good or not, because it really depends on which kind of environment you are in. But from the water quality perspective, because water is water, if you treated it, you should be able to still say that that water is of lesser odor potential.
Very good. I have one more question for you. So what do you do with the stuff on the other side of that filter? All the digestate, and tell me about the microbes. Do you have a special recipe? And tell me a little bit about that.
There is so the microbes on the other side, on this side of the membrane, the water goes, and we talked about the water, but the solids and the bacteria that stay on the other end, they are what I call bacteria on a treadmill. They just love to work out. So what that means is they don't end up putting a lot of energy for themselves, right? They are unlike the organisms that we use in our wastewater plant. They just like to chomp up food and grow, Let's say in a percentage world, if you provide 100% of wastewater to a wastewater plant in Manhattan, 55% will go to the bacteria in fat. Like you'll have this much quantity. The rest is just cleaned up. Whereas if you consider the anaerobic organisms, they just take 10 to 15%. And so that's why I call them bacteria on a treadmill, because they don't want a lot for themselves. They want to stay lean eternally. That's their nature. But then that lean nature is what corresponds to a wastewater engineer as sludge, because that's the amount of solids that you produce. So in the current way we do wastewater, we end up with half the amount of wastewater going in as sludge, which is a bulky quantity that they have to deal with. Whereas in the anaerobic process, you only deal with 15%. But the downside is they are slow growing. It's tough to maintain them there. They don't like to just double every minute. They take sometimes a day even to double. So that makes them harder to be retained, and that's where the membrane comes in. So the membrane helps to retain them. And so you end up with lesser solids, and those solids usually will be pressed, meaning they will be squeezed out of water, and they often are land applied in some cases. Biosolids, they are called. That's how most of the solids in wastewater treatment currently goes. It gets applied on the farm. Like the city of Manhattan just pumps it across underneath the Kansas River, by the way, and then gets it to the farms across the river. And they apply it on the corn crops there, basically. And this happens across the country, the world. But anaerobic solids are a different type. They just have a longer retention time or aging. This is just kind of cheese aging, kind of not exactly similar, of course. You cannot eat it, the end product. But the solids get aged. The longer they stay in the reactor, the better is the quality, because the pathogens which you are familiar with, they get inactivated the longer you contact them for the retention time, right? So they end up being a better quality from a pathogen transmission perspective. But you need to further reduce them of the organic content. You just get them to a bare minimum if possible. So, and then you basically land apply them. Or you can press them and dry them and use them for other bedding material if you need to. But the odor will be a challenge in them. And so that's why land application might be the way to go. And so that's what happens to the solids. I hope I answered your question there.
You did. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Prathap, in your earlier description of the pilot scheme that you've going, is it Norse agronomy?
Yeah.
It sounded like you were pushing towards this idea that it could be in the future self-sustainable.
Yeah, that's our hope, Mark, hopefully. And the science is indicating it's possible. We just need to be able to do it in an economic and life cycle, environmental, sustainable way. So that's our goal, is to be able to do that.
And could I ask you to talk more about that then? How envisage this becoming self-sustainable?
Right. So maybe I'll lay out a few of the barriers of what it is trying to do. So you have the farm, the crop here, and then you have the animal system which feeds off the corn. Let's say we are just taking a swine farm here, and you are bringing in food material for feeding the animal, which comes from a plant-based system most often. And then you have water, that's an essential factor for both cultivating the food for the animal and then for also the animal itself, and for maintaining the overall operations. And then you have nutrients embedded in all of these. Nutrients are not just nitrogen and phosphorus. You have several other microelements that are essential for both the plant growth and the animal growth. And so the idea is, how about we have a sustainable system where the plant growth and the animal growth are connected in the same farm, which might happen already in some places, but also bring in the loop of the water into a loop that closes between them, and also the fertilizers and the nutrients needed for both the crops and partly the animal, also from the same loop. And so you are just putting it all into a circular loop in a fashion that the net need from the external environment, I don't think it will be zero. Realistically, it will be minimized. I think it will be greatly minimized is our hope. So it will still be circular from the sense that the major flows are all circular. Why do I say you will still need to bring in? You'll lose some water to evaporation. There will be losses. And so that is something that probably by law of nature we cannot avoid. But the idea is to keep these circular loops keep going. But it's not as simple as it says. The idea when it will be economically viable is when each of the flow arrow intensities are stronger and cheaper. That's the other cost variable, or the wheel for it to move is faster. That way they can continue to be circular. That's what we are focused on. And the costs corresponding to the membrane process and capturing the energy and what value you can raise from that, and available are the nutrients to the crop from the wastewater derived fertilizers. Are they available in a reasonable fashion? How good is the water so you can use it for even potentially for the animals to drink and maybe for other options? All those we are at probably not at the end goal yet. We have shown that it is possible. Now, how do we do that economically? That's why we need a scale like what we are doing, and maybe another scale after that. So we need to first show that at this scale, for this specific practical location, it can happen. And so there is K-State is really an innovator and supporter for the idea. And the GFS is also a big player in this. And then the swine farm is interested in this for many other reasons. They have a practical vested interest because they have lagoon systems. And oftentimes it comes close to overflowing. This is a big concern for them because they will have to pay extra dollars for every amount of liquid that goes out because they are regulated by environmental agencies. So that's their primary driver. While they're interested in the circular concepts, they also want to be safe from a regulatory perspective. So that's the other angle, is legislation and regulation. And so if you are able to provide a treatment system that would make the lagoon to just not be able to ever overflow, and you're able to treat it to such levels that they won't need to worry about it, that's a big plus to such operators. And if you think about it, most of these swine lagoons are located in not hydrologically poor conditions. Iowa, North Carolina, they overtopped in 2018 when Hurricane Florence happened. And the one in K-State came real close in 1993. 2019, they were very concerned when we had those nice rains. And so when we have dry periods now, we know that in the Midwest, it can change very fast. And so that's the other piece of it. So how fast do those arrows become sustained and thick enough? And how fast can they turn around, which is the economics piece, will dictate the speed with which we will achieve sustainability. And also, we need to think about the global warming and environmental aspects. So if you were to bring the fertilizer from Morocco, you have so much footprint that you encounter to get it here, right? So if you can get it right in your backyard in a way that it is available, then that decreases the environmental footprint too. So that's the other aspect of it. It's the life cycle aspect. But the techno-economic aspect is what will drive it, I think, immediately.
So Prathap, thinking about all these different aspects and thinking about being able to meet your student last night at the 3-minute thesis contest, what about public perception? Priyasha Fernando won last year the 3-minute thesis. And for those on the podcast who don't know what that is, it's a contest where our students compete on their ability to articulate their research projects. So be able to talk the science at a level that everybody can understand and understand the importance and the usefulness of the research. And your student clearly does a fantastic job, and that's clearly a reflection of you. And so, thinking about public perception and being able to communicate the science that you're all doing and the importance of that, maybe give a few comments about that and what your approach is.
Yeah, that is an essential element, which I'll honestly accept. We need help from sociologists, from other elements of the academic and industrial and other walks of life. We are often too ingrained into making the technology work that I believe we do not possess the skills that will help us achieve the perception levels that are essential for people to communicate on. So one example of public perception is connected to water reuse, potable reuse. Even now, I always teach a class on environmental engineering, wastewater. And one of the questions I ask is, how many of you will drink this bottle of water? So this bottle of water is from direct toilet to tap. This is from Orange County, because that's where they have a system that is able to directly put it. It won't go into an aquifer or a river. You just collect it at the other end. And so my question, I take a survey, how many of you will drink it? And always there is about, thankfully it's not a significant fraction, but about 10% don't want to. So that tells me that, and that's okay. That's their perception and perspective. And if you were to extrapolate that, it means that we are still faced with public perception issues, especially with that. In the livestock or the food industry, that's a different element, because there they have economics and other drivers. When it comes to municipal community residence level use, that's a different driver. So I feel like there are different drivers to the public perception at each of these industrial or agricultural versus municipal setup. But when it comes to portable reuse, it's a big challenge. But in some cases, the places that had the highest negative public perception for water had to do it because they didn't have an option. Wichita Falls, Texas drinks direct potable water from wastewater. They were actually strongly against it for a while, and then they ran literally out of water, and they had to put in a system like this. And in Orange County, it was more of a matter of choice, but then it was a physical water scarcity, as we know there. And in some other places, it's economic water scarcity. In those areas, these technologies might be expensive for them. So the price per gallon might be higher. How do we get that lower? So coming back to your question on public perception, we don't know much as environmental engineers. We often work with sociologists and ag economics a little bit. So the GFS, again, is another point that I had to bring up. I get connected with sociologists and ag economists through that. Another program that's called the NERD program, the National Research Traineeship Program, which has really brought us all together. And so I'm really happy to be continuing to be a part of that. So I can engage in dialogues with sociologists and ag economics as to what really drives their thinking I'm so appreciative of that element, and I'm learning. And I think I won't be able to we as the technology developers won't be able to do it by ourselves. We need the other groups for that.
Yeah, it really speaks to the importance of multidisciplinary teams and tackling big challenges.
Right. Yeah, I think if we ever try to convince ourselves I'll be able to do all, I never win that battle even for a second, right? Because I've always have felt good with being a part of a team, knowing what your expertise is, but knowing that a team is needed and finding out who are the critical members of the team to get your task accomplished. And the faster you find those critical players, the closer you are to the solution. Oftentimes, that's not easy. You often don't know who the right players are. And it's a trial and error sometimes. I still learn. I'm not in any way close to solving those problems. But this DOE is one attempt at that, at getting to solve those problems. So we'll learn more. So I'll report back as to what we find out, but I think there are more exciting opportunities of that type. This issue of waste and sustainable reuse is never going to go away in any scenario, because even when we change our practices, we will continue to generate waste. That's the way our biology is. So we will have to do that. And so how do we effectively use that? That's the human part, but the animal part, that's a whole new discussion too. There have been new initiatives to produce meat from just cells. You might have heard of this coming from the food industry, right? But that also generates waste. You have to deal with the broth that's left behind. So
the kind of work you do, I almost want to say we shouldn't use the word waste. We should use the word opportunity.
I sometimes just call it black gold, misplaced resource. My first question to my students, whoever wants to work with me, is to make sure that they know that they share some philosophy. I don't want them to agree with me, but I want to make sure that they're not offended by working with waste, So not everyone is ready to do it. I'll also be honest with you on that. And that's the reality. That's okay. So whoever is suitable, I need to just be able to find them right now. And while I wish everyone likes it, but that's not the case, and that's okay.
Not everybody wants to work with human or animal waste.
Right. That's okay. Right. But that's where our opportunities lie, and realizing the significance and essentiality of it to the GF, the Global Food Systems Initiative, or to regularly just maintaining society. It's an aspect of life. And that group of folks, I belong to that specific group, and there might be people that like that. So, and my idea is to communicate that. That's essential. Not everyone needs to do it. Some of us, of course, need to continue to do it, while the others continue to do what they're doing. The goal is to make everyone coexist and benefit also in that process.
Agreed. Well said.
Yeah, there's a sort of fascinating dissonance between, we use the term waste, which implies we don't need it, but we also use it, as you've so eloquently explained, Prathap, as part of the cycle to help fertilize the food, and it's integral to sort of cleaning the water. My last question for you, so what next for you? What next once this pilot project comes to an end?
That's a valid point. And I wanted to say the ANMBR is one of the key platforms we are working with. So for me personally, this is the closest we can come, at least with this aspect, to moving it towards really realizing it to some beneficial use, right? At a scale that is considered reasonable. There are several options. One of them is to follow the internal interest within the swine unit. And we have been trying to see if the swine unit would eventually want to be a model farm by incorporating that, for which this scale of the system is not sufficient. We need to scale it up. And if they see the benefits, that would be another angle for which we would probably need to pursue federal, industry, and local funding to be able to do that. So that's one angle, is for the K-State angle of generating a sustainable farm. The other angle is to really take it to municipal wastewater facilities and say that this is another way that you can add it to your side stream operations, or eventually mainstream, because as I told you, they all do the activated sludge process. But then if you were to add this, it will improve redundancy of your system or provide resiliency to your system, because many of these wastewater facilities are carrying a lot more waste from other entities, and it becomes more and more concentrated. That's where these anaerobic treatment technologies can come. So the next 5 years, after the initial 3 to 5 years, is to really go to scale up of that aspects, and then also continue to work at the fundamental level to improve the barriers we establish on the techno-economic level. So the federal funding and all those will still be R&D initiatives, right? For it to be a scalable initiative, that techno-economic barrier needs to be overcome, for which we will need to work with various other entities, either it be public perception or the economics group, and try to see, okay, what needs to be our focus to really make this a sustainable platform and bring that to fruition, either in a farm or in a city, the municipal wastewater level. And I think it's a vision that will take me easily a decade. And in science, you always want some other folks to do the same mission in a different angle. Though they are considered competitors, I actually want them to work on that, because that tells you that this is a mission that others agree. And so while it's considered competition from the perspective of winning the funding and the dollars, it's essential for the larger society, because that's when the work gets done and it gets verified and more people believe or see the value. And it gets morphed in different locations based upon the regional needs. That's the true benefit of the science we do. And so hopefully others pick up too, and they see the benefit of it. I picked up from others that have done this earlier, and we have modified it with our own unique twist to it, which makes it novel. But the idea is to really have different people work on this platform.
One of the things that came to mind as you were talking through this is it's very heartening for me to have this discussion with a civil engineer, because I'm sure a lot of folks look at the food system and say, where the heck would a civil engineer fit into this picture? And it's clear that you're one of the many, many, many parts of the food system and a very important piece. I've got one more question that I'm going to steal from one of our past hosts, because I think it's a very relevant one. He's brought up a few times. For working in the area that you're working in and doing the kinds of research projects that you're involved in, what do you expect a student to bring with them? What kind of background and learning would those students need to be able to tackle some of these problems?
Right. So I would classify the tools the student brings with in several levels. Let's just first focus on a basic aspects, right? So the basic aspects are that they like what they'll do. Are they going to be passionate about this? And are they able to view this as something that will benefit them in the long run? And so those things you can kind of have as a prereq for the student, because if they don't like the work and they are more interested in the other aspects of the work, like just getting it done, then it's a harder fit. But then if the student also has the second level of qualities or skill sets, which is really, understanding of microbiology, which is essential for this line of work that we do, and understand a little bit of process flow and design, be able to get your feet wet and be okay with that. And you will get some wastewater sprayed on you sometime. That's supposed to be okay in this case. Of course, you need to take the precautions. You need to wear all your safety gear and all. But if that's another piece, is to have some skill to be able to do some actual work with the system, because we are indeed doing the hard hat engineering design aspect of things, right? So that's the other thing, is the basic academic knowledge on some of these courses, plus the ability to do some of that. And even if they don't have that, I believe the opportunity for a student is to pick up and learn those by working in a team. And so being able, and that connects to the next skill, which is to be able to work comfortably with a team and to be able to communicate to the best level that they can, and either written or oral. And I think that kind of becomes kind of an important one that connects all the other requirements I mentioned. Because if you're able to work with the team, you learn those skills. If you don't possess all of them right on day one, sometime before you get to execute your critical tasks, you have them. But a prereq before you start are all those, that intent. I think the intent and the interest and the ability to communicate and work, and some of the basic knowledge courses would be, I think, a sufficient recipe for them towards success. The rest is for me and the team to force them into that model, hopefully.
That was great. Thank you. Are there any last questions, Mark, from you, or Jeanette from you for Prathap?
I had a selfish question.
Yeah.
You talked about your time in the paper and pulp industry.
Yeah.
And it's selfish because I teach material culture in 16th, 17th and 18th century, sort of book production, paper production. Wow. So when I introduce students to paper from the 18th century, I talk about how it's made from cloth, how we're sort of focused on chain lines, that sort of stuff, watermarks. I've never really considered, as I'm explaining all this to the students, I've never thought about the use of microbes in the creation of paper. Could you explain?
Yeah, so that microbes can play a critical role for sustainable paper production. You know that the tree is brown, but the paper is white. And just to tell you, the main thing that makes the tree brown is the lignin in it. And to make the paper, we need to remove the lignin out. And the lignin is a very, very difficult molecule to break down. And so the way we remove lignin during pulp and paper production is to bleach it out, which is really environmentally unfriendly, and basically eat it out and waste those valuable lignin molecules. But if the microbes were to be involved, that would then make the process more sustainable because there are microbes that can eat the lignin and convert it into some other useful products. So they would just eat the lignin alone and then leave the cellulose, which is what's used for making the paper. And so right now, I think the microbes hold promise in a future pulp and paper process where the bioag microorganisms come in to eat the lignin out and leave out the cellulose for making paper, the way we make it. And in some cases, you let the microbes do a lesser job, so you make cardboard, which is just brown paper. You don't need the microbes much for that. But for the paper of the other qualities, you need them and not use bleach if possible. That would require a lot more work, but it's actually being done in some places like Finland and the Scandinavian countries.
Thanks, Prathap. That's really helpful.
Yeah, thank you for your interest. And I hope I covered and provided a good insight.
Oh, this was very, very interesting, Prathap. I really appreciate your time. It was a great overview. Did a wonderful job of clarifying it. Thank you so much.
If you have any questions or comments you would like to share, check out our website at ksu.edu/research/global food and drop us an email. Our music was adapted from Wayne Gowen's album, Chronicles of Carmela. Special thanks to him for providing that to us. Something to Chew On is produced by the Office of Research Development at Kansas State University.